All of you who registered for Middle East Peace Now January 30th forum featuring Dr. Haidar Eid. I will introduce him in just a moment, but before I do, I would like to welcome our co-host, the American Muslims for Palestine in Minnesota. It will be Sana, who is representing this organization, who will conduct the Q&A once Dr. Eid has completed his talk. I would also like to welcome our co-sponsors, Jewish Voice for Peace in the Twin Cities, and of course, always Women Against Military Madness. We really appreciate everyone's support. I also want to bring up the Northfielders for Justice in Palestine and Israel. I know that they also promote our forums, and we are grateful to all of the organizations who co-promote our programs. And we do the same for you all, of course. We're all in this together. Once I have introduced Dr. Eid, I'll be turning this over to Maddie, who will conduct some housekeeping items. But before I do, just a brief introduction. Dr. Eid and I had a nice short conversation prior to the beginning of this Zoom, and I know that he will provide an excellent forum. Dr. Eid holds a Ph.D. from the University of Johannesburg, South Africa, and is a member of the Palestinian Campaign for Academic Boycott of Israel, Al-Shabaka Policy Advisor, a founding member of the One Democratic State campaign, and associate professor of postcolonial and postmodern literature at Gaza's Al-Aqsa University. He has written widely on the Arab-Israeli conflict, including books such as Worlding Postmodernism, Interpretive Possibilities of Critical Theory and Countering the Palestinian Nakba, One State for All. Dr. Eid also regularly contributes to such online forums as Middle East Eye, and he is well known in the circles of BDS, which is one topic that he will be addressing this morning or this afternoon for Dr. Eid. Welcome, a warm welcome to Dr. Eid. Assalamu alaikum. Right now I'll turn it over to Madeline Hallberg, our fellow board member, who will discuss some short housekeeping items, and then we'll continue.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Dr. Eid, for being with us today. So just a few notes here. We will have be hearing from Dr. Eid for about 45 minutes or so, with about 15 minutes of Q&A following that. So all participants will be muted for the duration of this event, and please submit your questions using the Q&A feature of Zoom. And we reserve the chat feature for any administrative or help questions. If Zoom is really not working for you and you need to submit a question to get a hold of us, please email mepn@mepn.org and we will try to help. As mentioned before, this is also being streamed live on Facebook. So if you leave Zoom for any reason and can't get back in, you can catch the rest of the presentation there. And this event will also be available on the East Side Freedom Library's YouTube channel in the coming week. And then lastly, our event next month is on February 27th, co-hosted with WAM, and it is, we'll be hearing from Professor Mazen Poumsia of Birzeit University and Bethlehem University. So thanks very much, and we'll talk with you during Q&A.
Okay, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to Middle East Peace Now, and thank you, Maya, thank you, Janet, thank you, Maddie. And let me begin by as I did, by thanking everybody here, Middle East Peace Now, for organizing this online activity with us here in besieged Gaza. When I was contacted a couple of weeks ago by my friend Maya, we discussed the topic in general that I'm supposed to be addressing right now, and we decided to give a sort of a background summary of the situation in Gaza, from the horror of the blockade and the 3 wars of aggression that took place in 2009, 2012, 2014, and then move to the necessity of international intervention in the form of BDS, boycott, divestment, and Sanctions as the most effective tool of solidarity with the Palestinian people, and how to avoid normalization with apartheid Israel by heeding the BDS call made by the overwhelming majority of Palestinian civil society back in 2005. And of course, if participants were interested in listening to my personal view on political solutions, I can add my 2 cents. So let us begin by actually, when I started preparing myself for this talk, the first thing that came to my mind was a quote from one of my favorite Jewish philosophers, Walter Benjamin. And one of my favorite quotes is, there is no document of civilization which is not at the same time a document of barbarism, end of quote. Obviously, my talk is about the barbarism of apartheid in the Middle East. And I'm going to start off by giving you, a brief idea about our daily life here in Gaza. In the last 12 years, I'm taking you back to 2008, 2009, until today. Israel has launched 3 massive wars on the besieged Gaza. And many of the civilians were massacred, as everybody knows, by the indiscriminate bombing, which has been condemned by the United Nations, by United Nations experts and leading human rights organizations such as, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and even, Israeli mainstream human rights organizations such as Beit Salem. And these assaults, these 3 massive assaults, left over, and as much as I hate to talk about your numbers and figures, because we are talking about human beings, we are talking about people, we are talking about individuals with families, with children, with fathers, with mothers, etc., etc. But still, I have to give you numbers. Those 3 massive massacres left over 3,800 people dead, predominantly civilians, of whom hundreds were children. Children were massacred in broad day, life. Another 15,000 were injured. So the point is that we, the 2 million Palestinians in the besieged Gaza Strip, the overwhelming majority of us are refugees, refugees who were violently expelled and dispossessed from our homes by Zionist militias in 1948. We were subjected in 2009. We were subjected to 3 weeks of relentless attacks. In 2012, the same thing happened again for 2 weeks. And then in 2014, we were also subjected to the same attacks for more than 50 days. My point is that these attacks reduced whole neighborhoods, including my own neighborhood, Tal El-Hawa, where I live, where I am addressing you from right now. Whole neighborhoods and vital civilian infrastructure were reduced to rubble, literally, and completely destroyed, including tens of schools. Now, this came, and that is my point, this came after years of an ongoing, crippling, deadly medieval siege that has been imposed on Gaza since 2007, which is, by the way, a severe form of collective punishment. The deadly blockade that has been imposed on Gaza by apartheid Israel is clearly a form of collective punishment, according to major human rights organizations and the International Committee of the Red Cross. And just to remind you, and to remind everybody listening right now, the 4th Geneva Convention of 1949 ratified by Israel itself, by the way, bans collective punishment of a civilian population. So here we are talking about a crime that is still being committed by apartheid Israel since 2007. So I'll take you back to the first massive attack, 2009. A UN fact-finding mission on the Gaza conflict, headed by the highly respected South African judge Richard Goldstone, and I met him in person when he came to Gaza. And that mission, that fact-finding mission, found Israel guilty of, and I'm quoting, war crimes and possible crimes against humanity, end of quote. As did other major international human rights organizations, as I said, organizations such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, etc. But the point is that the same scenario that happened in 2009 was repeated in 2012, and a worse one in 2014. And the reason why, and we expect it to happen again, by the way, and the reason why Israel felt, that, it could do that, and it could come back and attack the Gaza Strip again and again, and bluntly speaking, because Israel feels and knows that it can carry out its war crimes with full impunity. The world, the so-called international community, has done absolutely nothing to prevent these war crimes. But let me, instead of delving into, what exactly happened in 2009, 2012, 2014, let me just, talk a little bit more about our daily life here in Gaza, where people also suffer from, you name it, contamination of water. 97% of Gaza's water is undrinkable. 97%. Contamination of air, soil, and just to give you an example, medical conditions due to injuries caused by international prohibited Israeli weapons, as well as from, of course, water contamination, cannot be treated because of the siege. Israel also prevents many other necessities from being imported. And here I'm talking about very simple stuff, very simple products, light bulbs, candles, matches, books, refrigerators, shoes, clothing, mattresses, paper, pens, books, etc., etc. Add to this, and right now I was just talking to my comrades before we started this session, that I'm using a generator right now because we have drastic cuts, power cuts, and almost every day we get electricity 6 to 7 hours a day. Add to this problem the drastic cuts endorsed by UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Work Agency, not to mention, of course, the closure of the 7 crossings Gaza has to the external world. One crossing, the Rafah crossing, which is the only exit that Gaza has to the external world, and which is controlled by the Egyptian authorities, in cahoot with Israel, has been closed for years. And all these conditions have led to one of the highest unemployment rates and poverty on the face of earth. So in spite of Israel's alleged unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005, it still maintains a permanent military presence in Gaza's territorial waters and controls the movements of people and goods onto the Strip by land and water, in addition to movement within the Strip through targeting anyone entering the no-go zone designated by the Israeli military, of course. Israel also continues to control Gaza's population registry the same way the apartheid system of South Africa controlled the population registry. Yet, and here's the point, that Israel claims that it is no longer the occupying power in the Gaza Strip and uses this excuse, in addition, of course, to the results of the 2006 democratic elections that took place in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Israel is using these excuses to intensify its policy of siege and lethal attacks on us, the civilians of Gaza. And as everybody knows, last year, Israel decided to become openly an apartheid state by legalizing racial discrimination. And honestly, I spent about 6 to 7 years in South Africa, and I studied the situation in South Africa. As was mentioned in the introduction, I'm a graduate of the University of Johannesburg, so I know what apartheid is all about. And I have tried very hard, very, very hard, to find out whether there are constitutions or laws in the world, similar to Israel's new nation-state basic law, which aims to establish a legal basis for, Jewish supremacy and racism against, indigenous Palestinians. And I have looked at, South Africa, and I have looked even at the American South under the Jim Crow laws. And these laws, basic laws, especially the nation-state basic law, targeting those living in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and those living in what has become, especially us here, the largest, and I'm using words used by Amnesty International, by even B'Tselem, the largest open air prison on earth, the Gaza Strip. And the conclusion I've reached personally is that only South Africa under apartheid and America in the eras of slavery and segregation. And now we have in Gaza the epidemic, the COVID-19, coronavirus to deal with. So you have the largest open air prison, completely controlled by apartheid Israel. People cannot leave the Gaza Strip. People cannot come in. Israel controls every single movement. And now we have the coronavirus to deal with. So while many countries shut borders, including the United States of America, and enforce closure, etc., we thought that was the fact that we are under a siege, that fact that we are isolated, that we thought that we were safe from the coronavirus because nobody's allowed in, nobody's allowed out, etc., etc. But unfortunately, as it has with so much of the rest of the world, COVID-19 found a way into Gaza. At the moment, we are finding it extremely difficult to deal with the existing, thousands of cases. In fact, we are in deep trouble. In Gaza here, we know very well that we are in deep trouble. Notice Gaza has only 60 intensive care unit beds and 65 ventilators for a population of 2 million. Now imagine that. Let me repeat that again. 60 intensive care unit beds and 65 ventilators for a population of 2 million, which means that we have only 2 intensive care units beds per 100,000 people. That's how bad it is. That's how bad it is in Gaza. And, as if 12 years of blockade interrupted by, the 3 massive, some people even call them genocidal wars, including, our friend and comrade, Professor Richard Falk, the former special rapporteur to the occupied territories, including our comrade Ilan Pape, the courageous historian who calls the blockade an incremental genocide. And as if that was not enough, so Israel has decided to tighten the blockade, not allow the treatment of patients and terminally ill people in West Bank hospitals. And you know very well, honestly, and people who know history very well, I really wonder whether there has been a population that has been denied, the basic requirements for survival as a deliberate policy of colonization, occupation, and apartheid, a multi-tiered form of oppression. But this is what Israel is doing to us, the people of Palestine in general, and the people of Gaza in particular. 2 million people live without, literally 2 million people live without a secure supply of water, food, electricity, medicines, with almost half of us being children under the age of 15. So you can imagine that. So now the point is, this is what we are living. This is what we are going through. So what to do? I mean, what is the solution? How can you people outside help? And what can we here in Palestine, in Gaza as well, do? And this is why, now let me move to the second part, of my talk, what is to be done. And my point is that it's very clear, like what happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s of last century against the apartheid system, the outside world intervened. And this is what we are saying. We are saying is that what we are saying right now here, and when I say we, I'm talking about Palestine civil society, Palestinian civil society sectors. The outside world has to intervene. And this is why we issued our call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions back in 2005, BDS. No wonder then that, leading anti-apartheid activists, and I'm talking about, the likes of, the late Ahmed Kathrada, I'm talking about Archbishop Desmond Tutu, I'm talking about, our comrade Ronnie Kasrel's anti-apartheid activists, who told us very clearly, and I heard them say that they believe that what Israel is doing to us, to Palestinians, I heard it from Ronnie Kasrel and I heard it from Desmond Tutu. What Israel has been doing to us is far worse than what was done to Black South Africans under apartheid. Even former American President Jimmy Carter, he visited Gaza. I think it was at the end of 2009. And on that visit to Gaza, he stated very clearly, and I remember very well, that the Palestinian people trapped in Gaza are being treated, quote unquote, like animals. And he said Gaza is a cage, and the people of Gaza are, being treated by apartheid Israel like animals. No wonder then that he gave, that title to his book, Palestine, Apartheid, Not Peace. So we have reached the conclusion here as Palestinians, as Palestinian civil society, that our fight in terms or in the form of popular resistance can seriously, like the fight against the apartheid system of South Africa, can pose a threat to Israel's system of occupation, colonization, and apartheid only if it is accompanied by a global, campaign of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So these are the two pillars of struggle that we are focusing on right now. So popular resistance on the ground, accompanied by a global campaign of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And this is why, very clearly, I'm saying it very clearly to you that we need ordinary citizens of the world, such as yourselves, including, of course, Americans. And you remember in 19, the older generation remembers this very well. In 1986, Ronald Reagan called Nelson Mandela a terrorist, if you remember. And so did Margaret Thatcher. That was in the mid-80s. 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from the Robben Islands, and then he became the first Black president of multiracial South Africa. And what we are saying is that, with our global BDS campaign, we are reaching our South African moment, the moment that I have just, alluded to. And I think, yes, people need to intervene. You need to act. It's that, it's that moral, ethical responsibility that every single citizen in the world has. You need with us to show Israel that, that you are watching what it is doing to us, and that you are not going to tolerate it, because silence, very simply, silence is complicity. That's what Martin Luther King had to say as well. Silence is complicity, and that there is no place for blatant racism and racial and religious supremacy in the world. That's what you did with Donald Trump, with that white supremacy. Racism, that's what it is. Let's call a spade a spade. And this is exactly what the global anti-apartheid managed to do in the 1970s and 80s, as I said, of last century, until the inhumane apartheid system crumbled in 1994. And I know some people here don't know what BDS is all about. And I want just to give a very, very brief introduction. I mean, BDS is a civil society initiative. Let's be clear about that. It's a civil society initiative, a call made by our civil society. Almost all Palestinian civil society sectors issued a call back in 2005. Us as victims of a multitude system of oppression, occupation, colonization, and apartheid, fighting on behalf of the international community for the rule of law in Palestine. So we decided to issue that call, calling on the international community to boycott apartheid Israel until it complies with international law. Namely, so if people don't know what we are asking for, we are fighting for the implementation of United Nations Resolution 194, which calls for the right of Palestinian refugees to the towns and villages from which we were ethnically cleansed in 1948. I myself, my parents were refugees. I was born in a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, grew up in that, that refugee camp. And both my parents died in 2005, dreaming of the day when they would be allowed to return to the village of Zarnuga. Unfortunately, they didn't. And they died. Both of them died in 2005, carrying the key of the house which they left in 1948. So, and because Maya asked me, to talk a little bit about normalization, etc., and BDS, and I have also been getting, we as BDS activists here, we have been getting queries, sent by some activists about, international gatherings and conferences that are organized usually to address BDS related issues without, and here's my point, without acknowledging the Palestinian leadership of the movement. And I need to be absolutely clear, about that. It's a Palestinian-led movement. The same way the global BDS campaign targeting apartheid was South African-led. I mean, this is a very important point. So when we, Palestinian civil society issued our call back in 2005, now everybody knows that it's, the BDS call. We were counting, honestly, on people of conscience rather than governments. We've learned, we studied, and we learned the South African lesson. When the South African, the anti-apartheid movement, issued its call back in 1958, 59, a handful of ANC activists gathered in London, and they decided to issue a call, calling on the international community to boycott the apartheid system until it complies with international law, etc., etc. Now, the South African comrades at the time knew very well that, governments of the world wouldn't immediately heed the call. And this is why they were banking on civil society. And that's what they told us. And this is why we've decided to address, ordinary people, civil society organizations, ordinary people, buying goods in supermarkets, artists, cultural figures, cultural organizations, academic, athletes, sporting clubs, etc., etc. In fact, we have our own definition of, the international community. What do we mean by the international community? Our international community consists of civil society, as I said, churches, pension funds, municipalities, clubs, music bands, universities, etc. We are aiming to isolate Israel the same way the apartheid system was isolated. But in fact, what we are aiming is isolating, the apartheid institutions that support the multi-tiered, system of oppression in Palestine. We wanted, back in 2005, we still want the same thing, to isolate Israel's regime of oppression, as well as corporations and institutions that are implicated in its denial of Palestinian rights under international law. International law, of paramount importance to us was and remains the making, or rather making, the movement inclusive and being anchored in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Because we knew very well that we would be accused of having a sort of anti-Semitic discourse, etc., etc. And this is why we made it absolutely clear that our call is anchored in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So based on this, we were confronted with questions. Still, people are asking questions, and I know some of you, would be asking the same questions about what would be considered normalization. And here I'm trying to answer Maya's question. I mean, what can be considered normalization and what not? And this is why we worked on what has become the anti-normalization criteria that were adopted by a near consensus of the largest Palestinian civil society entities since November 2007. At the first conference, or the first national BDS conference, we specifically called for boycotting events and activities that portray the relationship of colonial oppression, which is inherently abnormal, as everybody would agree, as if it were normal. Making the abnormal oppression of the Palestinian people look as if it were normal. So we argued that this kind of activities, contribute to whitewashing Israel's crimes, occupation, apartheid, and settler colonialism against us, the Palestinian people. And as I said, inspired by the South African anti-apartheid model, we went further and issued what became the boycott guidelines to guide people who have heeded our call. We were always asked by, activists, solidarity activists, what do you exactly want us to do? I remember this very well when I was in South Africa. Our South African comrades, our American comrades would ask us, I mean, after the signing of the Oslo Accord, the facade of the Oslo Accord and the so-called two-state solution, what do you want us to do? We want to support you. What can we do? You, as the victims of apartheid Israel, should be guiding us. And this is why we issued the boycott guidelines to guide people who have heeded our call all over the world, and to counter 14 years of, the Oslo Accord, the facade of the peace industry and its culture of normalization. Unfortunately, yeah, that's what was going on between 1993 and 2005 when we issued our BDS call, a form of normalization, and those projects that I'm talking about had, to some extent, those projects of normalization since the Oslo Accords, given a false impression of symmetry, or rather parity between the oppressor, Israel in this case, and the oppressed, us Palestinians. The oppressor in South Africa was the apartheid system, and the oppressed, the indigenous population of South Africa. There is no parity. There was no parity in South Africa. There was no parity in the American South. And you know very well that 14 years of negotiations between the leadership of the PLO and Israel, between the two parties, had in fact obfuscated the lines separating colonizers and colonized, and made them both, the colonizer and the colonized, look equally responsible for the so-called conflict. Now that is important for us. We want things to be very clear, the same way it was very clear in South Africa. So the point is that Israel's multi-tiered system of oppression, namely occupation, colonization, apartheid, settler colonialism, etc., had been reduced to a conflict, as if you have two equal parties here. And this for Palestinian civil society is intellectually dishonest. And honestly, we said it very clearly, it is morally reprehensible. I mean, to equate the oppressor with the oppressed. And any project that promotes this kind of false impression ought to be boycotted. That was our point, and this remains the case. So, and I want to be clear, because sometimes people say when BDS is dogmatic, boycotts everything that is Israeli, boycotts individuals. Actually, I beg to differ. BDS is undogmatic, and it made it absolutely clear that it welcomes cooperation with those Israelis. I mean, let me be clear about that. It welcomes cooperation with those Israelis who recognize our basic rights under international law. We have, comrades in Israel, boycott from within. Israeli comrades who have heeded our call. And this is very clear, and this is very sensitive for us. So we welcome cooperation with those Israelis who recognize our basic rights under international law, including right of return. And that is condition number one. Condition number two, those Israelis should be involved with us in a common struggle, or what we call not coexistence, but co-resistance. So two conditions. One, the Israelis should recognize our rights under international law, and any project that we have with them has to be a form of co-resistance rather than coexistence. Co-resistance against Israel's oppression of the entire Palestinian, the entire Palestine or Palestinian people, whether in the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank, occupied territories, or in the diaspora, or the third-class citizens of the State of Israel. 1.6 million Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel who are treated as not even second class, but rather third class citizens. And let me add, one last point here. Contrary to the false claim, made by some people and, some individuals, including, by the way, very well-intentioned individuals, BDS actually has never targeted individuals. BDS does not target individuals, but rather institutions. And this is very important. Institutions that are implicated in Israel's systematic violation of Palestinian human rights. And I'm not sure, actually, whether we have enough time now to address the issue of political solutions. And, that was BDS. And BDS, let me remind everybody here that, that BDS does not take a position on the ultimate political solution for Palestinians. That is very clear. BDS is a rights-based movement. It includes supporters of both two states and a single democratic state with equal rights for all. It is, as I said, it is a rights-based movement. And as argued by human rights activists, this approach, the rights-based approach, shifts the paradigm away from charity. The Palestinian cause is not a cause of charity. And the rights-based approach shifts it from charity towards moral duty imposed on the world through the international consensus of human rights. But, and I know that, people always ask me, what is the political solution? What is the end game? And since BDS does not endorse a political solution and does not have a position on political solutions, you have people in Palestine, the official leadership of the Palestinian people believes in the so-called two-state solution, all right? I personally, and this is my personal view, I believe that, and I fully support calls for a single democratic state that recognizes and accepts all inhabitants of historic Palestine as equal citizens and full partners in building and developing a new shared society, exactly like South Africa, like what you have in the United States of America, a new society, shared society, free from all colonial subjugation and racial discrimination. That is what I personally support. That is not the position of the BDS campaign. Everyone, including repatriated Palestinian refugees, would be entitled to equal rights, regardless of ethnic, religious, gender, sexual, or any other, identity. All citizens have to be equal, regardless of, those identities. And that, I believe, is, the solution that can guarantee justice in Palestine. Thank you so much for listening to me and being patient. I need to look at the questions now, and I'm not.
Dr. Haidar Eid, Sana Khalil will now conduct the Q&A for you, so she can order that for you.
Okay. Okay,
Right.
hi, Sana.
Hi, Dr. Eid. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. So we're going to get started with a few questions. The first one that I have is someone's asking, what about all the thousands of missiles and rocket attacks by Hamas from Gaza from 2000 to 2013? Isn't there aggression on both sides? So if you could just address that question first.
I'm sorry. I mean, because of the internet connection problem here, I had half of the question. About Hamas. Sorry, come again.
Yeah, so it's saying, what about the thousands of rockets by Hamas from 2000 to 2013? Isn't there aggression on both sides? Is what it's asking.
I think, look, I've addressed this question, the question of two sides, etc., etc. And I think that we do not have two sides to the, to the situation here in Palestine. I mean, there were no two sides in South Africa. There was, the oppressor community, settler colonial community, and those, that were oppressed. But since Hamas was mentioned, and I was actually, expecting this question, let me be very, very, very clear. Back in 2006, if you remember, January 2006, and after the war on Iraq, etc., and the Americans wanted to create what was called the New Middle East, if you remember, Condoleezza Rice, etc., and they wanted to create a new Middle East characterized by democracy. So they asked people, to vote for their representatives. We went to the polling stations in 2006. The elections in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and let me be absolutely clear about it. I myself did not vote in 2006 because I believe that you cannot have democracy, true democracy, under the barrel of the gun of the occupier. But when people went to the polling station in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, people wanted to vote against the Oslo Accords, against the facade of the two-state solution. And the only alternative political force that people saw was, Hamas. And this is why people voted for Hamas, in the hope of bringing down the Oslo Accords, in the hope of, putting an end to the facade of the two-state solution. And Hamas won the elections at the time and formed the government in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And the world did not accept that, for all the reasons that you know. I was opposed to that myself, but that was the democratic choice of about 60% of the people who went to the polling station in 2006 and 2000 in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Not all Palestinians went to the polling stations. Palestinians living in Israel as second-class citizens were not allowed to do that. Palestinian refugees living in the diaspora were not allowed to do that, but only 40% of the Palestinian people did that. Hamas won the elections. Hamas is exactly like everybody else, like all other organizations on the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, is part of the resistance movement against, colonization, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, etc., etc. Now, does everybody agree with the, ideological background and the political program of Hamas? Not really. Not really. Not everybody. And according to the latest surveys here in the West Bank, if we have elections, and we are supposed to have elections for the Legislative Council in May, which means after 4 months in May, Hamas would be getting 30 to 32% of the vote. And Fatah would be getting also about 30 to 32%. That makes about 60% between Fatah and Hamas, okay? And that leaves about 40% of the population, undecided. I personally do not think that we should be going to the polling stations, But so coming back to the question about Hamas, Hamas has opposition here. Many people are opposed to the rule of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but Hamas is part of the general national and political movement in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And I hope that I answered this question.
So the next question is, Okay, the next question is, how do you respond to the challenges that BDS is anti-Semitic?
I've already said that, the BDS movement is anchored in, international law, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And therefore, the last part of my presentation, of my talk, I said that we believe in equality for all human beings, regardless of religion, regardless of gender, regardless of race, etc., etc. And notice, most of my talk was about, what we learned from, the struggle of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And then I said it's very clear. The BDS movement is undogmatic in the sense that it welcomes cooperation with, those Israelis who recognize our basic rights under international law. Now, if you work and cooperate with individuals who target Israel's system of oppression of the Palestinians, colonization and apartheid, does that make you anti-Semitic? That is my point. All right? No, the BDS campaign is a campaign that fights on behalf of the Palestinian people and international law, trying to implement international law in Palestine based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, the point is, Israel, as soon as we issued our call back in 2005, Israel started a legal war and the campaign of Haspara. Haspara is the Hebrew word for, propaganda, trying to tarnish the image of the BDS movement and BDS activists and portraying them as, anti-Semitic monsters, etc., etc. But notice, even anti-Semitism, it is not a Palestinian or a Muslim or an Arab phenomenon. In fact, we suffer from anti-Semitism the same way Jews in Europe and the West suffer from anti-Semitism. It is actually a European phenomenon rather than an Arab phenomenon. And notice, as a BDS movement, I said it, my personal view is to have a shared society where all people live, regardless of their religious background. What we are fighting against as BDS activists is, religious supremacy, be it Jewish or Muslim or even Christian.
All right. Great answer to the question. So this next question is, do you have any hope that Biden will change anything for Palestinians?
Yeah, this is a very excellent question because, I remember when Barack Obama, became the first Black president of the United States of America, people were very hopeful. And I remember at the time I was at the studio, interviewed by a TV channel, and somebody else, actually a Hamas official, was with me. And then we were asked the same question, all right, about Barack Obama. His answer was that, he said, it reminds us of Martin Luther King, he said. And Martin Luther King's, famous I Have a Dream speech. And he said that we were sure that, Barack Obama would change American policy in the Middle East, and he would do, try to implement international law, stop the, American support for Israel, etc., etc. I was not that hopeful. I was not that hopeful at the time. And what happened is, I was right. I was proven to be right after 2 terms, 2 presidential terms by Barack Obama. And I can tell you now, the Biden administration will continue the same policy, Barack Obama's policy. The Biden administration, will not stop its financial and military support of apartheid Israel. The Biden administration will keep repeating the same 2-state mantra, state for 2 peoples living side by side without taking concrete steps to make that happen, And in order to make that happen, I personally do not believe that a sovereign, independent Palestinian state on 22% of historic Palestine can be achieved. That cannot be achieved because Israel has taken irreversible steps to put an end to the two-state solution by building the apartheid wall, by annexing more than 30% of the West Bank, by turning the Gaza Strip into the largest open-air prison on earth, etc., etc. Irreversible step. The American administration has unfortunately supported that practically by recognizing under, of course, Donald Trump, by recognizing Jerusalem, including Eastern Jerusalem, as the city, as the capital of apartheid Israel, by moving the American embassy, I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice, by moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, by cutting aid to UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Work Agency, by recognizing the Golan Heights as part of apartheid Israel, etc., etc. So where are the Palestinians supposed to have their independent Palestinian state right now? It's impossible. So what is the solution? Is Joe Biden's administration going to endorse the Palestinian BDS code? I mean, that's what the Palestinian, the Palestinian political forces and Palestinian civil society want right now. No, the American administration is not going to do that. The American State of Secretary has already said it in his first statement last week that they are not going to reverse the steps already taken by the Trump administration, and they are not going to move the embassy, excuse me, the embassy back, to Tel Aviv. So there will be steps taken by the new American administration where they will resume ties with the Palestinian Authority and, some financial support, and that's it. And that's it, nothing else. Sorry, can we take one more question? And yeah.
Do we have time for just one more question? Okay, so this is, I think, a timely question because you talked about the incidence of COVID-19 in Gaza. So if you could please address, because a couple people are asking, what is the potential for receiving the vaccine? What is the vaccination situation in Palestine and in Gaza specifically?
Yeah, yesterday Israel made it absolutely clear that it wouldn't be allowing, vaccines into Gaza. Today, we heard a statement by the Palestinian Authority that Israel would be allowing into the West Bank, not the Gaza Strip, 5,000 shots of the vaccine. But so far, Israel has not been allowing vaccines into the Gaza Strip. And by the way, I must mention, I work at Al-Aqsa University. We lost our fourth colleague to the deadly coronavirus. We have lost 4 colleagues at from Al-Aqsa University, and Israel has said it and made it absolutely clear that it will not allow vaccines into the Gaza Strip. What are we going to do about that? I really don't know. And this is why, again, this emphasizes the point I was just mentioning and the point I was just saying. I mean, the utmost necessity of the intervention of the international community. In 2009, excuse me, in 2009, I shared a platform with one of the Holocaust survivors, the late Hayo Meyer from Holland. And what he said at that meeting, is that, you cannot bring, the elephant and the mouse, lock them up in a room and then ask them to negotiate. That is impossible. That's an impossible situation. The lion has to intervene on behalf of the mouse. And he said to us, the lion in this case is the BDS movement or the international community. You do not have two equal parties here. You do not have two equal parties. I mean, Israel has, some people say, the fourth strongest, army in the world, equipped with more than 400 nuclear heads, Merkava tanks, F-16, F-35, F-36, etc., etc. And what do Palestinians have? Nothing, absolutely nothing. I mean, firecrackers that the international community condemns, thinking that they are rockets. What do we have? Stones. You remember during the Gaza Freedom, not the Gaza Freedom March, the March of Return. March of Return. I mean, I took part in the March of Return. Thousands of, innocent civilians, refugees, went to the wire separating or surrounding Gaza, and then Israel started shooting. We lost thousands of innocent lives. And what did the international community do? Absolutely nothing. And now Israel is not allowing vaccines into Gaza. The official international community is again doing nothing. And this is why, as BDS movement, BDS activists, we have lost hope in the official bodies of the international community. Neither the United Nations, nor Security Council, nor European Union, etc., is prepared to have the guts and, call a spade and ask Israel to stop its war crimes in Palestine. And this is why I'm conducting this talk, right now with you people. We are banking on conscientious people. And this is why we think, 72% of ordinary Americans have made it absolutely clear that they think, BDS is, a call for human rights, that they support our right to BDS. The majority of voters for the Democratic Party support our right to BDS, And this is why it is time. It is time for us to call the shot, for you people to call the shot. And we said it, this is our South African moment, but we can really reach that dawn which the South African people reached in 1994 when they saw the apartheid system collapsing and, voting for Nelson Mandela as the first Black president of South Africa, only with the support of ordinary people, churches, synagogues, clubs, etc., etc. Otherwise, I'm telling you, what is happening right now against us here in Gaza is, as my friend and comrade Ilan Pape calls it, incremental genocide. Okay, that's the end of it. Yes, Sana.
Answer, Dr. Eid. Thank you so much for all of your detailed and thorough responses, and to really rally everybody to support the BDS movement. It's so crucial and imperative right now. I'm going to turn it back to Janet from Middle East Peace Now so she can wrap up. Thank you.
Sana, thank you very much, and it's nice to meet you. Thank you, Shukran, for your incredible talk. I wrote lots of notes down, and I'll probably listen to the recording all over again. Very profound and extremely timely. Thank you again. I would like to let all of you know that keep your ears and eyes out for the next announcement of our Middle East Forum, which will be February 27th. We will be featuring author and human rights advocate Mazin Kumsiya. Dr. Eid, do you know Mazin? Figured you would. He has spoken with MEPN. Good. Glad to hear that endorsement. He will be speaking February 27th. He has spoken with Middle East Peace Now in the past, some years ago, and he's very much looking forward to a reappearance. Again, my thanks to all of you and to all of our co-sponsors and our co-host as well, and to Sana for directing the Q&A. Have a great day, everybody.